Okay.
I'm recording on my end and see if you could record on your end.
Okay. Yeah, I'm recording.
Perfect.
Yeah. So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for tuning in for another episode of Through the Storm, recovery themed podcast where we talk about rediscovering our best selves and working towards character development and the connections and things that we need as people in recovery to stay sober and have a quality of life that supports that choice to stay sober, which is a very important decision. Today, I'm honored to have a very special guest on the show, my good friend, Dr. Jamie Merritt. Hi, Jamie. Welcome. Thank you so
Hi,
much for being
hi,
on.
J Red. It is so good to see you, and I'm delighted to be chatting with you today.
You too. You look beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, of course. So, Jamie is a woman that is really needs no introduction, but I'm probably not going to do it justice because she wears so many different hats and she has achieved so many different things. Definitely a woman of inspiration and motivation, and extremely insightful. The work that she does is incomparable and invaluable. So, with that being said, Jamie, you are a doctor. And that's a doctor of what? Is that psychology?
So, my doctorate is in human services with a specialty in counseling studies. So, by profession, I'm a clinical counselor, which is slightly different than a psychologist, but
Okay.
I have been trained to do therapy and now I train other therapists. Although, most important to the topic of our conversation today, I'm also a person in long term recovery myself.
Yes.
And the only reason that I've been able to do all these things is because I got sober relatively young, and it was a good thing.
Wow. And I mean, that's impressive because I know trying to get sober when I was a younger man, it just wasn't doable. I just did not have the resolve, and I don't really think I understood what was at stake and what I was up against. So,
What I was up against, yeah, that resonates because we're up against a lot when we first start to walk this path, and even as we continue to walk it.
right. And that brings me to like the first thing that I would love to talk about, love to hear about. So you are an esteemed author. Jamie has written many books, one of which was really profound to me, and that was Trauma in the 12 Steps. Can you tell us just a little bit about what inspired that piece of literature and kind of what were you hoping to achieve when you wrote it?
I love this question. I first wrote Trauma in the 12 Steps in 2012. It's had a couple different lifetimes since then. It was reissued in 2020. And then there's a meditation reader and a workbook that goes along with it. I think my professional intention for writing it was to show clinical professionals that there is still some value in 12-step recovery, even though in many ways it can be outdated, and the way that certain treatment centers, certain meetings tend to teach the 12 steps can be rigid. And I'm somebody who benefited from both 12-step recovery and benefited from outside help, trauma therapy, other forms of spiritual practice. And so it was really an attempt when I first wrote it professionally to bridge some worlds and to hopefully encourage 12-step sponsors that we need to update some of the language and need to update some of how we operate in order to make sure we don't push people away. Now, my personal intention, and when the book first came out, somebody asked me the same question, and my gut level answer is my hope is that one day anybody who seeks 12-step recovery could have an experience like I had with my first sponsor, Janet, because she was somebody who was pretty classic 12-step.
Mhm.
She was also a deep woman
The
of
classic,
faith.
you mean like by the book?
Well, I don't think that's fair because she definitely wasn't a thumper. She wasn't somebody who was so rigid and so scolding, but like she was trained by the nuns who Sister Ignatia knew. She worked as a social worker in Cleveland, so she was very close to the source of AA and knew the program very well. Yet she understood trauma. So that's why I said she wasn't a thumper. She was a flexible person. To me, she was the living embodiment of attraction rather than promotion. She
Hmm.
had a lot of concerns about some of my behaviors I showed early in recovery, yet shame was not her operating
Was
mechanism.
she one of those chess pokers? Like you do it this way or else.
Oh, no, not at all.
Like that
No,
at
no,
all.
not at all. I mean, and so if you could imagine somebody who has real classic AA grounding, but also understands trauma, she would
Mhm.
know, not to have poked the chest and not to, have been rigid. So,
Yeah.
like, case in point, here's a way it played out. So, when I first started on the recovery, knowing I needed some kind of recovery, excuse me, my thinking was drugs were my problem, not alcohol.
Right.
And even the first couple months I was trying things on my own, I had stopped using any kind of drugs, but was still drinking alcohol. And so, where we were living at the time, she was AA. There were only AA meetings really available in our area. And I said, Janet, I don't think I belong in AA because drugs are my problem.
Right.
And she said, and this is what I wish anybody in AA could do, was like, it's okay. Come to the meeting. And where you hear people talking about alcohol, just insert your drug of choice. And
Mhm.
she never pushed that rigid singleness of purpose on me. And she very much operated from this place of it's all going to kill you, it's all interrelated. And she was willing to work with me from looking how the two are connected. And what's interesting is eventually I was able to see that alcohol was actually my bigger problem.
Mhm.
And I never would have gotten to that place if she would have been so rigid with me at the beginning. And
Yeah.
we don't talk about drugs at AA, or you don't belong in AA.
I
This is
had
more,
experience with
and
that.
and a lot of that, stuff. It was just come as you are. And she taught me the program, to be sure. And she taught me a lot of, again, very kind of classic parts of the program. Yet she understood trauma. A few months into me starting to get sober, I had a really bad traumatic meltdown at my work. And she also knew the place I was working with and working for, and they didn't know what to do when I had this essentially nervous breakdown at work, and they called her. And I still remember her telling the person I was working for, this isn't misbehavior, this is a traumatic reaction. And
Why, like, what did she have some special training or
she was
something?
a social worker. She was a
Oh,
social worker.
okay.
Yeah. She had worked as a social worker in a lot of the hospitals and settings in Cleveland for many, many years, then eventually had her own private practice. And when I met her, she was officially retired.
Hmm.
But I do think I was,
Brought her out of retirement.
yeah, call it lucky, call it blessed, call it just a stroke of good fortune
Yeah.
that I happened to have somebody bring me the program who really got trauma. And so my larger mission, if you will, in doing this work is to show people that the 12 steps can still have value, but we have to be more sensitive, trauma responsive, like Janet was, in how we deliver it to people.
And I love that you stated that because even today in some meetings, I still hear, guys who have like over a decade or more of sobriety. And so these are people that you think you can rely on what they're saying,
Mhm.
but they still have the mindset that, they need to like disregard your feelings entirely because your feelings don't matter. I'm worried about saving your life.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you create that barrier because you're not being considerate of how a person feels, then are you really placing yourself in the position to be of maximum service and to be really helpful to them?
Right. And as somebody who has seen a lot of different sides of the 12-step world, and as somebody who, as a trauma therapist, has seen a lot of different kinds of people come to me for help, I do think part of what drives them is this sense of if we get you too caught up in your feelings and your story, you're just going to have more excuses to drink and use. Yet, people can go too far with that for sure. And I see that more often than not in some 12-step spaces where you're shutting down people's feelings. You're shutting down one of my slogans that I hate the most, and I write about this in the book, is take the cotton out of your ears and put it in your mouth.
Why
Because
do you hate that so much?
I hate it because it's like, you need to shut up. That's what I hear when somebody,
Don't you think some people do?
yes, and so
I,
hear me out. It's a yes, and it's very much a both and that. Yes, I see the intention of the slogan, which
Mhm.
is stop running your mouth
Yeah, you're
and
not letting
actually
anything in.
listen to what others have to say. So I have no problem with that as long as we give the and side of it, which is what you have to say matters. Your feeling matters. Because when you grow up in an alcoholic home, this is from the work of Claudia Black. The 3 unwritten rules are typically don't talk, don't trust, don't feel.
Mm,
And so if I'm coming into a space seeking help and I'm told I'm not allowed to talk at all,
right.
that's just reinforcing that message even further.
Right.
It,
Cosmo.
what I hope I'm imparting is the sense of both and that there's a lot of kind of classic folk sayings and things from the 12-step programs that I think can still be very valuable if we look at the and as
Yeah,
well.
I take that. Yeah, yeah, okay, I get that. And it makes perfect sense, and I agree with that absolutely. So for a person who's new, new to recovery or newly back,
Mm-hmm.
they're trying to figure out like good sponsorship, and you're trying to find something in which you can place your trust in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then one of the other things is like you see sponsors that are doing a little bit more than just taking people through the steps, and
Mm-hmm.
whether they should or shouldn't, personal choice, right? But I've seen some that I feel is really, really damaging when you get another person to become too reliant
Yes,
on your direction and guidance. And do you address that as
I
far as
do.
okay?
I do because I truly believe the purpose of a sponsor is to help you work through the steps. And some sponsors, as you've mentioned, do become more than that. My current sponsor I consider like family, and he has been for many years. But I think the problem becomes when we put any human being up on a pedestal,
Mm,
when we turn that sponsor into a higher power, if you will,
yeah.
because I don't think any human being, one single human being, should occupy that. Now, I know a lot of people use the collective of the group as higher power, especially if they don't believe in God. I think that's fine, but we always get into issues when it's like that one person because people are human, people
Yeah.
will let you down. And there's also on the other side of that, and I do address this in the book, a lot of toxic sponsorship.
Absolutely.
Sponsors taking advantage of sponsees. I don't want to go down the whole rabbit hole of that, but that's where I also encourage readers, especially if you're a person in recovery reading the book, know that the first person you meet that helps you does not have to be your sponsor, does not have to be the person you put all your trust in. Look around, see where you get that goodness of fit to at least take you through the steps. And even if you see other people in meetings like putting all their trust in their sponsor and thinking that's the way I have to do it, that's not the way you have to do it.
Right, because like where is the point at which a person involved in the process of recovery learns self-efficacy, where they learn to begin to have some trust in
Yeah.
their own judgment and decision making again, you know?
Correct. And I think like if you look at the ancient yogic teachings from India, you may know the word, people listening may know the word guru, which can have some shady connotations as well, because a lot of gurus exploit people for sure. But all a guru is in that system is somebody who removes the darkness. It means teacher, but specifically somebody who removes the darkness. Yet the best gurus are the ones who eventually teach you that the true guru lives within you.
Wow.
And even a guru I studied with said, my hope one day is that you'll be able to fire me, that you will realize that the true teacher lives within you. So, yeah, I always say be cautious if a sponsor positions themselves as, because I do think in a lot of ways, at certain points in our life, yes, they do know what is better for us or what is best for us. And the whole reason I have this life I do is because my first sponsor gave me so much guidance. She even was the one who suggested I go back to grad school for counseling.
Hmm.
Yet at a certain point, it was her facilitating me to be able to trust myself and to trust my own judgment. And she was doing that throughout. So I'm glad you brought this up as a point of discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I just know that over the years that I've struggled in and out and had many, many sponsors, and they were excellent people. A lot of them were very, very successful in their personal lives as well. But and I respected that, and that's kind of what I wanted, right? And that's why I asked them to sponsor me. But I got a great sense of fear and insecurity. Like
Mm-hmm.
those feelings were heightened through the relationship, where I began to second guess myself all of the time. And
Mm-hmm.
that was very, very uncomfortable to think that I couldn't trust myself after having some sobriety and some recovery to make even the most minute of decisions, you know? So my next question, I was reading the article that you sent me, okay? And I want to bring it up here because there was something in it there was a lot in it, but there was something in particular that roused my curiosity.
This is the article, Does AA Work, that I recently wrote. Yeah.
Absolutely. And for those of you that would like to follow and read Dr. Merich's work, can you give them just like a .com or something where they can find a link to your works?
Yeah, a lot of places actually. The best website I like to shout out is what's called redefinetherapy.com. And that is where you can get all my different articles that I've done, other podcasts I've been on, a lot of resource videos. Everything I've done for free is at redefinetherapy.com. If you're on the platform Substack, I also have a Substack. You could just search my name, Jamie Marich. That's where this article JRED is referencing is from. And jamiemarich.com is my main webpage. You could search me on socials.
And I do have some questions before our time is up here about the Institute of Creative Mindfulness.
Yeah, that's my company. Yeah, for sure. But yeah, go ahead. I'm curious what resonated or what piqued your interest in the article.
So we've had some conversations, you and I, in the past about our spiritual and religious upbringing. And we hear all the time in the rooms that, you know, it's a spiritual program, not a religious one. Yet it's hard for anybody, especially like me, who was raised in a very religious environment, to make the disconnect and not be so provoked by the similarities. You know, like a lead could be perceived as a pastor or a minister. They even pass around the offering plate because we're you know, and then what is a lead but a testimony? You know what I mean? Yeah. So, and then they have their Bible, you know, the big book.
The big book, yeah.
which, you know, there's a lot of references in there to terms that could not be mistaken. They must have come out of some type of Christianity of some sort, you know. And that's not even a hidden fact about, you know, the historical account of where AA came from. But you talked about spiritual abuse. And this is a term that I'm just starting to hear more and more of. You were, in fact, the first person to ever bring that term to my awareness. And I have to say, I'm ashamed I haven't done a whole lot of research on it. But could you explain to our viewers and listeners, like, kind of what is spiritual abuse and how might that affect a person in recovery?
And one of the things JRED and I have in common, I also grew up very religious. I had parents who were both conservative Christians in their own way. My mom was Catholic. My dad was evangelical because he converted. And I went to both churches on Sunday morning for my entire childhood. Oh, and I'm queer. So that was fun to eventually, you know, connect that and realize the stuff they were saying about me. So the easiest way to think of spiritual abuse is whenever God is used as the weapon. Whenever God, or really any spiritual construct or spiritual idea, like some meditation communities, it's enlightenment. You will never reach enlightenment. You'll never be one with your true self unless XYZ. So, but in a lot of the Christian churches we were raised in, it would be God, Jesus, whatnot. So it's whenever that is used as a weapon by somebody in power to control, to demean, to manipulate others. So for it to be abuse, there has to be a power differential. So that could happen with a pastor, a minister, or a rabbi to the people that they serve in a congregation. It could happen parent to child or grandparent to child or aunt and uncle to child when there's a lot of putting down of the child in God's name. And sometimes other forms of abuse, like sexual abuse, are done with God justifying it. Like, this is what God wants, and God will be upset with you if you tell. But even without those other forms of abuse, spiritual abuse in and of itself can still be very damaging. And it tends to most affect, I'll just speak for myself, people like me, where everything in me loves spirituality and loves connection to something greater than myself and something deeper within myself. And so growing up in this container where I was told God was only one thing, and I was shamed, especially because of my sexuality and a lot of other parts of my nature, for not fully buying that or not fully believing that is a form of abuse.
I was taught that it was I was taught that homosexuality and things of that nature were a demon, that it was a spirit, that it was a spirit And I've been through all kinds of almost like fanatical
Mhm.
activities, like,
Yeah.
exorcisms to some
Casting
degree.
out. Yep. Casting out the
And
demon.
that was
Yeah.
just for trying to talk about it. Like, I was young and I had no idea where
Right.
these feelings were coming from. I just knew it wasn't the norm. It wasn't what I saw at home. And I was just really looking for a safe place and environment to explore those things. And ultimately I just ended up hating myself with the scriptural references and all of that, like, you're doomed and you're an
Mhm.
abomination and you're a blight.
And the thing with so many of those scriptural references, and I can and will go down this rabbit hole with people who want to, is as I was doing a lot of my own deconstruction or healing from this, I realized how many translational problems there are in the current English Bible that a lot of folks use in churches and whatnot. How
Mhm.
out of context so many of what those clobber verses are called are taken. The
Barbers.
Bible says absolutely nothing about same sex activity with women. It's all referencing men. And if you look more at the historical context and some of the translation issues, a lot of what scripture is condemning is not consensual same sex,
Right.
same gender love. It would be at the time the more Greco Roman practice of like a man being with a boy, which
Yeah,
obviously is still a problem that we see
for sure.
in modern society. So like a lot of things, people hone in on what they hate and use God to justify it. One of a brilliant philosopher and scholar that I've listened to as I've done some of my own healing put it very simply. He said, to talking to people who do these kind of things, you don't hate gay people, or God doesn't hate gay people, you hate gay people. God doesn't hate this group, you do. And
Yeah.
um, I think it can be natural for any of us to use God to support our contentions and whatnot. And I think that that's what's happening more than anything. But when you're a kid being told this by your parents and people who you do see as God,
Yes.
because your parents are, or your guardians or whoever's raising you, they're the ones providing you food, clothing, and shelter. If you go against them, you may be in trouble. Like that was me.
Yeah.
I was
Homeless
gonna
and
be in
hungry. Right.
trouble.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get kicked out and all of this. So I did what I was told. And so much so that in high school, a lot of people I went to high school with would not have pegged me as somebody who would end up with an addiction problem or
I would.
or end up in AA, because I was the smartest kid in the class. Like I was
Same.
Victorian. And I say that because addiction can affect anybody,
Right.
can absolutely affect anyone. And often it's the kids who seem like they're the do-gooders and the ones who have their stuff together
Why do
that
you think that is?
I think for me it was a way to I made myself do very well in school because I do have some natural intelligence in some areas, but I really buckled well and did well in school because I
Mhm.
felt like that's what God wanted of me. That's what my
Mhm.
parents wanted of me. That was the way to keep from being honest with myself about what I was feeling. So I sometimes,
Or a part of you that enjoyed the attention of
oh
achieving
yeah, I
something?
it gave
Okay.
me something I could be special
Because I
about.
think that my first addiction, I've always said this, was attention. That was the first thing that I was addicted to.
Yeah, I think I phrase that for myself as overachievement. But yeah, that a lot of that's about attention because I did get positive attention. I did get this sense that at least I'm special about something, and maybe that will override all these other ways that I just feel like crap about myself
Right.
and can't be honest. And then at a certain point it cracked. I was 19 years old when it cracked. And that was also the time. I mean, that wasn't the first time I used drugs or alcohol because I had certainly dabbled
Mhm.
through my high school years. But when I was finally living outside of their house, that
Mhm.
was the first time I came out to myself and was really honest about my sexuality. Yet
Right.
I also had this sense of if I do anything with this,
Mhm.
I will lose everything. I'll lose my family. I'll lose some of the support I'm still getting from my
When you
family.
say with this, you mean like with your sexuality?
Yeah,
Or,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Like
same.
if I was public or had a partner of the same gender, then yeah. So I did a lot of And I think a lot of us who struggle with this, you could call it a disease, you can call it a disorder, an affliction, whatever. I'm very big on pick the language that works for you.
Mhm.
Uh, Very good. I could still be very good about showing people that everything's good on the outside,
Yeah.
but on the inside, it was a mess. And it wasn't till the end that I started experiencing some more noticeable consequences. But for a lot of the time that I drank or used, it was just, I'm still trying to show the world that everything's okay.
Same. I want to keep up appearances, and
Mhm.
I learned that a lot because there would be some turmoil in the home, but like we had to get ready to go to service, and then we had to
Yep.
come in as a family, and so I can relate to all of that. So now I always hear this other thing. I hear like when people get up and they're sharing their story, their experience, strength, and hope, and they say, I grew up in an alcoholic home, I was abused, all this other stuff, but that's not what makes me an alcoholic. Now, granted, I know in technical terms, an alcoholic,
Yeah.
it differentiates them as what the phenomenon of craving, correct, and this mental
Right.
obsession, obviously, but I think that that is a little bit of a minimization about the impact that our upbringing and our environment has on our
Yeah.
susceptibility to become, an alcoholic.
And I will say that the professional field, at least of psychology and even addiction psychology, is moving a little past, has moved a lot past like what a lot of traditional AAers believe.
Mm.
Because again, it's a both and, because at the time when Bill Wilson created the program, there was this sense that if you were an addict, if you were an alcoholic, it was a moral failing, you were weak, you were whatnot. So in even developing what would become the disease model, that this is something that is chronic, progressive, fatal if left untreated, I look at that understanding as something that I think was revolutionary at the time, but I
Mm.
now see it as a bit old school. And we're old school, not in a good way. And I think we're doing each other a disservice if we don't look at the role that trauma and abuse can play in the development of addiction. Now, that being said, there are some cases out there where I believe it is pure genetics and people have a pretty good life and can still develop it. That's not most of the people I've met, though,
No,
in the
me either.
recovery, right? So,
Yeah. So I was looking here in your article, and it's like right around the close here. Um, I take no issue with how they obtain recovery or healing as they define it. And I believe you're talking about just the individual
yeah.
path
Mhm.
of recovery. Um, and you say that you hope that people seeking help in the days and years to come are met with a greater sense of accessible choice.
Yes.
And so this brings me to like, there are so many different emerging groups, and there
Mhm.
have been ever since AA
Right.
published their book, right? NA and all those other things. So in a lot of your work, I'm reading about not just the trauma informed aspect of it all, but also just like the harm reduction and things like that. You believe in that?
I do. You could probably tell from my voice. I know I would probably be dead or not living a very well life if I was on that path.
Right.
But a lot of people I love are, having a fighting chance because a path of harm reduction has been embraced. So I am for whatever is going to help people have a chance and pursue wellness. Yet I also know myself enough.
Mhm.
I've learned enough of my inner workings to know that the path of abstinence that addresses my spirituality and my trauma wounds through therapy is what I need.
Absolutely. So tell me about this memoir.
The memoir. I love how you say that, my friend.
This memoir, yes.
Yeah. So in October of last year, my memoir was published from North Atlantic Books called "You Lied to Me About God."
I love
And yeah, that is one of my definitions of spiritual abuse, religious trauma, when people lie and lie and lie and lie to us about the nature of God. And the title of the book comes from one of my favorite definitions of shame, which is shame is the lie someone tells you about yourself.
wow.
And that's from Anais Nin, who is a French author and French Cuban author. And I first heard it probably about 2005 when I had a handful of years sober. And it just was like, yeah, Shame is when I believe those lies, like I'm an abomination, I'm this, I'm that.
Definitely.
And so the more I
How
read,
could you not? How could you not believe that when you're
yeah,
so young and impressionable and no reason to suspect that the people that are teaching you this information are flawed or incorrect?
correct. Yeah, yes, to correct to your point. So as I explored some of my own deep-seated issues, or as somebody who is still a very spiritual person and believes in God, but has really had to unpack a lot of how the church and cultural messages from church have impacted me. I ended up writing a poem which turned into the title of the memoir, called "You Lied to Me About God." And the "you" is my dad, my parents. The "you lie" is my churches in some extents. And I do get into how AA can be rigid like church in a lot of ways. And I was fortunate that I've been able to really stay friendly to a lot of 12-step recovery, because I was able to see the BS when I saw it.
Yeah.
Like
Do you
some
have that poem?
do I have the poem?
Yeah.
It's
Could,
around here somewhere. Yes.
I just wondered if you could share it with us. I didn't know if you knew it by
Yeah,
heart.
I think sharing the poem could be an interesting way to give your listeners a little snippet of the memoir. And
I
if
like
they
that very
and
much.
then if they do in fact, resonate with the poem,
Mhm.
uh let me get I'm just looking for it.
Okay.
Then uh they
And,
check out
and
the whole memoir.
I'm gonna confess, I started reading just before I needed to log on. And that's why I was having so much trouble figuring out the log on for this Zoom call because
Oh, you're fine.
I was I was engrossed. I'm telling you, those first few pages, I was hooked. I was really
Oh,
hooked.
you
Like a
you are a
freaking
doll.
listener.
You are a doll. Well, I am just logging in to one of my places, and then I will
You're good.
have
I put you on the spot, so
oh no, I actually really like this idea, because reading the poem will give people a taste, I think, of what my spiritual abuse journey was like.
Mhm.
And then if they want to read more, they can read more. All right, here it is. You lied to me about God, the poem. Oh, take a breath. Always good to take a breath when we think, read, or do something that may be difficult. You lied to me about God. You made me believe that God is a jealous lover, that only He could love us so much to send His Son to pay the ultimate price, and that even though we peons have free will, if we don't accept this love just as it is offered to us, then we'll be condemned to the fiery lakes of hell, but only after living a life of suffering on this earthly plane. You lied to me about God. You told me that the homos and the queers were an abomination who relished in the sins of the flesh, mocking that Son whom God sent to die for us, all the while not realizing that the daughter you lied to is queer too. And come to think of it, Jesus may have also been playing for Team Rainbow. You lied to me about God. You forced your version on me like a rapist, making me pray a warped salvation prayer when I was too young to possibly know what I was doing, or that God could really mean, or what God could really mean, especially when, to a child that age, the only God I could have known were the people who brought me into this world, fed me, and put a roof over my head. You lied to me about God. And I realized it when, in the depths of my mental hell, at the bottom of a bottle, the God of my understanding met me with compassion and showed me love. They confirmed that I am spectacular just as I am. And so is the varied, splendid world that surrounds me. By discovering this world and her people, I found the grace that your lies promised. You lied to me about God. And yet, sadly, you believe to this day that you told me the truth. and you believe that you are still telling me the truth, and you can't hear it any other way. So the great unanswered question for me, what would Jesus have me do with someone who lied to me for so long? Father, can I forgive you, for you know not what you do? But you know, and you continue, and I pardon you anyway. And I pray that one day you may discover just how much you've been lying to yourself.
Woo! Girl, I need a moment.
Take it. I'll thank you for asking me to do that.
Oh my gosh. I've got goosebumps over here. I felt every bit of that on every level. And I remember the day that I was leaving my
I think you're,
on the courage
yeah,
to tell my mom. But
yeah.
I've been seen and noticed, you know, and I love my mom. So this isn't, a trash session on her, but yeah, that was the day that I told him. And I just remember thinking, I've got to leave their God behind. And I was convinced I was going to hell.
Yeah.
I was convinced. And I was like, I'm going there, so I may as well have as much fun, on the way there. And I lived a very godless existence. I lived like there wasn't one. I didn't consult anyone or anything. I didn't have any consideration for morality or any of that stuff. And I got really, really ill in doing that spiritually, emotionally, mentally.
Yes. A lot of people I've met experience that, where, hey, if I'm going to hell, then I may as well go whole hog, so to speak. I may as well. And I think that's a common story for a lot of queer people, or people who, and I met that person once who was not queer, but it was that she had sex before marriage and had a child before marriage, and her very rigid minister daddy told her, well, you're going to hell because you already sinned. And it's like, where's the role of grace?
Right. What this is gospel. Gospel means good news. Where is the good news?
Yeah. So there's just so many tales like this. And I believe, at the end of the day, when I look at my story, God and I are actually cool. I'm even cool with Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't necessarily believe everything I was taught about Jesus, and I cannot stand what people do in God's name.
Right.
And one of the reasons I'm even very vocal right now, especially in queer spaces, about my beliefs, is to be like, hey, you still have the right to spiritual care.
Mm-hmm.
And God does love you despite what you were taught. I think God doesn't know what's going on sometimes just as much as we don't. The state of the world, right? But yeah, thank you for the opportunity. Thanks for asking me to read that original poem, because that poem I've not shared very widely because it evolved into the memoir, which is the story behind all of those stanzas, right?
Oh, powerful. I can't say what you need to be doing, but I needed to hear that.
Thank you, my friends.
And the biggest thing that resonated with me was that, like, when you lie, the point where I realized that I had been being lied to about God's nature. I found him in my active use when I was in the gutter too.
Yeah.
And there wasn't a space that I could exist where God's love didn't find me and pull me out of that mess. And then I was just like, well, either he's really, really sick and he wants to save me to keep torturing me. You know what I mean? But I was doing a good enough job on my own. I was like auto-domesticated, if you will, towards self-destructive tendencies.
Yeah.
So let's get back to there's so much that you're doing. There's so much that you're involved in, the podcasts, the books, and what is this Institute for Creative Mindfulness?
Yeah, so the Institute for Creative Mindfulness is my company that primarily exists for training other therapists. So I am a pretty internationally known trainer in some trauma methods like EMDR therapy, expressive arts therapy. So Institute for Creative Mindfulness runs my trainings. We also do run a retreat every year that happens, and that's open. We do have a lot of therapists come on it, but it's open for anybody who wants to dive more into expressive arts as a healing process. So, and we also do some communal spaces. I've been making a space available, especially for therapists in the current political climate, just to
I
come.
remember attending that cool drum circle.
Yeah, we did a drum circle. We've done
Awesome.
different community activities over the years, although primarily exist as a training organization. Yeah.
Where's that located?
We actually don't have a physical location
Okay.
anymore. I'm based just north of Akron, Ohio, but I do a lot of our work now, training wise and outreach wise, online. So, for example, the therapist support spaces we've been doing, people join us from really all over the world for those.
Are
And
there certain requirements or credentials you have to be a part of that?
Well, for the political climate therapist support spaces, we're still trying to figure out what to call the group now that it's post-election, right?
Yeah.
Uh, just as long as you have some kind of human services role, like working with the public,
Okay.
and you need a safe enough space to talk out some of how the current climate is weighing on you. A lot of the programs I do, though, you do have to be a mental health therapist to actually take training in. But stay tuned, because even the retreat that we do end of every April, that is for anybody who feels called to attend it.
So this is coming up this year's, huh?
Yes,
Is it
yes.
already full or?
No, we still have some spaces. I think we're taking registration until mid-April, like April 11th, the cutoff. Then the retreat's the last weekend of April. So if you go to instituteforcreativemindfulness.com, right on the front page, you can see what we're doing programming wise. Yet the other website that I wanted to really plug was redefinetherapy.com, because that's any of my resources that you can get at no cost online are all cataloged on that website.
Fantastic. So are you taking personal clients still?
So it's a good question, because a lot of people do ask. I do, but I always have to kind of caveat this with people if they want to work with me, because my teaching and my writing schedule takes up so much of my time. I'm really not set up where I could be somebody's weekly therapist. If I do see folks, it would be more for like monthly or twice a month type of care. But if you are needing more regular, consistent care, I do have a network of folks, especially here in Ohio, that I can hopefully point you in the direction of.
So really just go to that redefinetherapy.com and just see what resources are available, because there is so much. You are such a wealth of not just information, but just help and support. Did you really think, like when you were first getting sober, that this is what your life was going to look like? Did you see yourself as being so integral?
No, I mean, I, I I jokingly say my life has been the result. Somebody asked me, yeah, I'll tell the story this way. Somebody asked me probably a few weeks, maybe a month ago, Jamie, what was your business plan when you started doing this work? And I said, the only business plan I ever had was the 11th step, praying for knowledge of divine's will for us and the power to carry it out. Some of people may say putting one foot in front of the other, doing the next right thing. I even went back to school for this, like I mentioned before, because my sponsor thought I would be good at it. And it wasn't like it was an order or you need to do this. It was very much an invitation. Because she had worked in.
Sound interesting to you before you started it?
Sorry?
Did it sound interesting to you before you started in this field?
Well, here was my thinking. I took, when I was working on my undergrad, which was in a completely different field, I took one course in psychology and I did not like it at all. So when she suggested go back to school for counseling, that was my first answer. I didn't even like psychology class. And she said, doing the work you've done already on yourself. And I was working at a children's home at the time in Europe. And it's a big, long story you could read about in Trauma and the 12 Steps. But she said, you've already learned so much about the art of helping. So now just go back and get the technical training so that you can do this for a living. And she said, I think now that you're in recovery and that you're on a path of wellness, you will appreciate psychology more. And she was right about that. But I look to that story as she did have a sense of what my potential was before I even realized it for myself.
So you obviously have been a creative influence, a creator of so many different resources and outlets for other people. What inspired you for some of these things that you've brought into fruition for other people? Like, what was feeding your desire for creative mindfulness and all of that?
Well, sure. And I mean, the arts have been an important part of my life since the beginning. I grew up singing and on stage and playing instruments and writing. And I will share very publicly that when I was a kid, I remember going into my basement and I had a Mickey Mouse record player and I would put on music and dance and act out scenes and scenarios. And so I think the arts, even before I knew that the expressive arts could be a form of therapy or healing, they were there for me. They were there for me to help me have an outlet for expression before I even realized that I I needed to express stuff. I needed to get things out and work on things. So I feel very strongly about the power of creativity in healing and in wellness, so much so that even when I start every workday, because I have a lot of emails I'm often drowned in, and on days that I teach, I sometimes spend 7, 8 hours a day on a computer doing a training, doing a teaching. I make sure I start my day without question doing something creative. Even if it's just writing a short poem, even if it's getting down my guitar and playing one song, that has become a non-negotiable for me, even in the late.
Part of your meditation. Like,
yeah, the part my recovery, that I will prioritize my creativity. So
I love that. I love that. So I gauge a lot of questions and things like that towards like the newcomers,
right.
because I think honestly, I don't know if I've ever gone beyond that, and it's not even just a matter of time. It's just like spiritually, there is so much out there. Like I don't know that I'll ever get beyond spiritual infancy, but I feel very encouraged and inspired by the work that you do to explore other means of recovery and wellness. And like in your early stages, like what was your budding kind of um, exploration into other means of healing? Was it counseling and therapy? Did you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
because all this that you're doing now, it had a starting point. They had starting points, and like I'm just very interested by like the process and like where in your sobriety journey that started.
I go back to Janet again, the first sponsor, because I was blessed, lucky, whatever, to have somebody who, yes, worked the 12 steps with me, but also had that social worker's awareness about trauma, et cetera, et cetera. But as she took me through like the first year of us working together with steps, she said, when you go back to the US, you're probably going to need to do trauma therapy. And she was right. And when I was in graduate school, I realized that I was going to need to do more professional therapy. And that's when I got in with a trauma therapist. But Janet was also somebody who supported creativity and me making music. And I think she very much had an attitude of, you do what you need to do to take care of yourself, whatever that looks like, that there's many paths up the mountain. There's not just one path up the mountain. So I'm grateful that she not only promoted trauma awareness in me, but even planted those first few seeds about doing formal therapy around trauma.
So if if someone were coming into the rooms, 12-step fellowships, any one of them, and really just didn't see the benefit in sponsorship and looks and read over the steps and like they're really turned off by the God terminology and it just doesn't look like something they can do. Like obviously we want to believe that those people still have hope for recovery. What would you kind of advise them to do if if you're that person?
Great question. And I will base it off of what I have observed over the years, which is whether you believe in God or not, whether you see yourself as a spiritual person or not, are you willing to change the way you operate? We may think of it as change your lifestyle. We may think of it as people, places, and things. Because whether somebody is working an AA path or somebody's working a path that's so far removed from AA, the common denominator I have seen is a commitment to lifestyle change, is a recognition that the way I've been doing it is not working. So I'm going to need to make some small changes. Now, in my story, I think in a lot of our stories, the God of our understanding or spirituality helped us with that.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that's necessarily a requirement. Are you willing to get your head out of your behind? Might be the motivation that you need, because I do think a big part of recovery, as spiritual and as compassionate and as trauma informed as I like to be, is I think we all have to have that moment of, can I get my head unstuck? Am I willing to try things differently? Because the way I've been doing it isn't working for me. And I think there's a lot to that, that if you can just, and I do like the data time logic here, spend each day trying something differently than the way you did it the day before. I think you can heal. And I've seen people both with 12-step and without 12-step heal, as long as there's that commitment to, I got to change the way I've been doing things.
So you know what, Jamie, I could do this for hours, honestly, but it wouldn't be fair to do that to you for free.
Oh.
I just want to say that I am so very proud of you, and the work that you are doing is stellar. And it takes a very courageous person to just put their whole life and be so transparent as you are in your memoir. And like I said, I've just read, you know, the intro, the few first pages, and Trauma in the 12 Steps. I still own a copy here. Now, this is probably one of the originals, so I probably need to get an updated version. But just following some of your podcasts and you know the articles that you write, and just staying on the leading edge of being helpful to people and being innovative when it comes to options for healing and recovery and spiritual character development. I just think that you're such a treasure, you know, and I hope that more and more people get to discover, you know, that beauty in you and hear more about your story and participate and engage in the things that you have put your blood, sweat, and tears into to bring out change for other people. I'm so honored that you came on today. I just want to plug a couple things for you again. So it's the .com is Redefine Therapy. RedefineTherapy.com. Please stop by and see all the many wonderful options and resources that are available to you. Get connected with some of this literature that this wonderful doctor has written. It's profound, insightful, and very enlightening. It gives you a fresh look at the 12-step process. It's called Trauma in the 12 Steps. Please grab a copy of that. And then the Institute for Creative Mindfulness. So all of you professionals, novices, it really doesn't matter. Stop by one of these sites, get one of these books, and support one of our pioneers here. Also, you guys can reach out for the podcast at Through the Storm TTS. That's capital TTS at the end of Stand Strong. Sorry, Stand Strong Through the Storm. So all lowercase Stand Strong, capital TTS, and that's at gmail.com. Check out the podcast on YouTube and subscribe to the channel, like and support recovery. Thank you again, Dr. Marich. You have a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me on, J-Red.
Appreciate you.